Such successful and accomplished women, both of which have Louisiana roots, by the way. Don't let them tell you otherwise. Connie will pretend to be from Alabama and talk about her Alabama roots, but don't let her kid you. She has deep Louisiana roots as well. I was telling Connie before that, first of all, I also want to thank the sponsors that made this possible. I want to thank our legislative leaders. I was teasing the chairman of our education committees and our speakers. I came in that last year we had Governor Jeb Bush come. This year we've got Secretary Rice. I don't know how they're going to follow it up next year, but it has been getting bigger and bigger and better every single year. I want to thank our sponsors and others that made this possible. I'm going to be very brief because I know folks here have got a chance to hear me talk about education repeatedly. I do want our secretary to be able to come and share her perspectives. I don't know about you, I was so excited to hear her remarks. Last summer at the convention, the Republican National Convention, she went on stage and talked about education. I literally called her up. I wasn't able to go to the convention. We had some weather issues here in Louisiana with a hurricane. And so I called her up and said, you know, I was so excited to see you talk about education. I think this is one of the most important issues facing our country and facing every state in this country. Just a few very simple thoughts. Number one, I think that as Americans, we're used to being number one in the world. We're used to being the world's superpower. We're used to having the world's strongest economy, the world's strongest military. It doesn't sound very American to say we're number 17. We're number 25 in science and math. It doesn't sound very American to say if you're in your 50s, we were number one in educational attainment, but if you're in your 20s, we're actually now in the middle of the pack. We're 16. Now, we can't be number one when it comes to our economic development. We can't be number one when it comes to our quality of life, our military, or all those other things that we value here in America, unless we are also number one when it comes to educating our children. The second thing I would offer is that we need to take partisan politics out of education. Now, what do I mean by that? First of all, I want to thank, here in Louisiana, we passed some very aggressive reforms last year with the help of dozens of Democratic and Republican legislators in the House and the Senate. Half the Senate Democrats actually ended up voting for our education reforms. And that doesn't often get recognized. It's not a Republican, it's not a Democratic issue. Indeed, when the President, in his first official State of the Union, in his second year as President, gave his first official State of the Union address, he said, I'm going to paraphrase, he said, a child's education, the quality of a child's education, shouldn't be determined by his zip code. The President was exactly right. It shouldn't be determined by his race, his parents' income, his gender, or his zip code. And then what was interesting, Governor McDonnell gave a Republican response, and Governor Virginia came out and unprompted said the exact same thing in his own comments. So we need to check our partisan IDs at the door and work together to say we all need to work together to give our kids a great education. The third point is that every child learns differently. Some of our children will do extremely well in traditional public schools. Some of our children will do extremely well in parochial schools. Some of our kids will do well in online schools. Some of our kids will do well in dual enrollment schools. Some of our kids will do well in all kinds of different educational environments. So it's so important that we have the dollars follow the child instead of forcing the child to follow the dollars. We need to trust parents and empower parents to make good decisions for their kids. And that is so important. That's what we're doing. We started in New Orleans. Now we're doing that across the state of Louisiana. You're seeing some incredible results in terms of improving graduation rates, improving test scores. Fourth and final point, and then I'll be finished, is that we have to be impatient when it comes to education. We have to have a sense of urgency. You know, the reality is there are some great teachers and great schools in Louisiana. And let's give a round of applause for our teachers. Everybody. The reality is that none of us would be here today if it wasn't for our great teachers. And they don't get recognized enough, and we need to do a better job recognizing and rewarding our great teachers. But the reality is also that not every child has access to a great educational today, a great educational opportunity today. We in America like to believe we're a country that believes in equal opportunity. We're a country that likes to believe that any child can do better than their parents. Any child can aspire to become an entrepreneur, a doctor, a lawyer, an accountant, a small business owner, or even President of the United States. Or if you're my son, an NFL kicker. But you know, any child can aspire to whatever. I told my son, genetics may get in his way, but it's good to dream. But the reality is, if every child doesn't have a great education, it's not fair to say to every child, we're giving you an equal opportunity to pursue the American dream. Not every child lives in a neighborhood where they can go to great schools. Many of you parents will move to neighborhoods with great public schools. You will save enough money to send your kids to great private schools. Too many families are trapped in neighborhoods where they don't have good options. So my fourth and final, and maybe most important point, is we have to have a sense of urgency. We cannot be complacent or satisfied with the status quo. For too long, people will tell us, we'll just make incremental gains. That's not good enough. Our children only grow up once. It's not fair to tell them to wait. They only have one chance to get a great education. All of us are blessed to be here because some adult took an interest in us, some teacher actually motivated us when we were children learning. We owe it to our children to give them the same chance to get a great education. I look forward to the conversation and the questions. But again, I'm just so honored. We have Secretary Rice here, and we've got one of our own, Campbell, back here to moderate this session. Thank you all very much for coming out.
Well, first of all, thank you, Governor Jindal, and thank you to all of you who are here to talk about the importance of education and education reform. Thank you, Campbell. It's great to be reunited with you. I just want to make it clear, I do indeed have Louisiana roots. My father was born right here in Baton Rouge, grew up here, and I was an unrelenting fan of the LSU Tigers. So I come to the issue of education from a number of different perspectives. And first and foremost, I was a child of educators. Both my parents were educators. My mom was a teacher. And it was an article of faith in our family that the way to a better life was a high-quality education. And indeed, we all have our family heroes. And one of our most important is my grandfather on my father's side, John Wesley Rice Sr. John Wesley Rice Sr. Was a sharecropper's son in Utah. That would be E-U-T-A-W, Alabama. And when John Wesley Rice Sr. was a young man of in about 1919, he decided he wanted to get book learning in a college. And so he asked how a colored man could get educated. They said, well, you could go to that little Presbyterian school a few miles from here. It's called Stillman College. So he saved up his cotton. He went off to Stillman College. After a year, he didn't have any more cotton, but he couldn't pay for his second year. And they said, so you have to leave. He said, but how are those boys going to college? They said, well, you see, they have what's called a scholarship. And if you wanted to be a Presbyterian minister, you could have a scholarship too. And Granddaddy Rice said, that is exactly what I had in mind. My family has been college educated and Presbyterian ever since. In my family, that story resonated because it meant that I had an ancestor who understood the transforming power of education. And not just for himself. He would come here to Louisiana, marry a Baton Rouge native, and he would found schools and churches side by side all over Louisiana and Mississippi and Alabama. But he knew that it would transform generations too. My father would be college educated and later on a university administrator. My aunt, Teresa, would go to the University of Wisconsin, get a PhD in Victorian literature in 1952 and write books on Dickens. You think what I do as an odd-core black person, she wrote And so he understood the transforming power of education. And that has been a strong family value for us. Secondly, I've had the great fortune to be provost at Stanford University, one of the wonderful and great institutions in the country. And it's terrific to see the best young minds before you and to see those eyes light up. But you know, I know that a place like Stanford's really doing its work when I can see the child of an itinerant farmer sitting next to a fourth-generation Stanford legatee. And I think from now on, that access to higher education is going to even the playing field. And as long as it is true that education is a way for upward mobility, then we're going to be a strong country. Third, I come at this as the former Secretary of State. Because as you go around the world and you see what people admire about the United States, there is much that they admire. But the thing that they admire most is what I sometimes call our great national myth. And now, in this sense, a myth isn't something that's untrue. It's just a little bigger in your thinking, a little outside of your thinking. And that is the belief you can come from humble circumstances and you can do great things. It doesn't matter where you came from, it matters where you're going. And that's led generations of people to come here from around the world, from South Asia, from Mexico, all around the world, to be a part of that. But it's also meant that we've been able to mobilize human potential from across classes. And the key to not being trapped in the circumstances of your birth has been a quality education. And so to the degree that we are not able to deliver quality education for our kids, we go right to the core, right to the essence of our democracy. It is absolutely the case that if we don't reform K-12 education, that we're going to have people who cannot read. If you can't read by third grade, you're probably not going to read. You want to try to get a job in this modern, technologically sophisticated economy where you can't read? And those people are going to live on the dole because they're going to have no place else to go. And it's going to continue to be the case that only 30% of the people who take the basic skills test to get into the military can pass it. But the greatest tragedy is that what unites us, this belief that you can come from humble circumstances and do great things, it'll no longer be true for, in many ways, the most impoverished of our children. And then social cohesion begins to break down. We become two countries, one capable and one not. And people will become aggrieved. Why don't I have? And then aggrievement's twin brother, entitlement, shows up. Why don't they give me? And at that point, you've lost control of your circumstances. So I believe that education is the key to the very foundation and the very core of our democracy. It is a matter of urgency. It is the great civil rights challenge of our time. Because if you are poorly educated, you're written out of the democratic equation. And that's why I want to thank you for all that you're doing to try to improve the state of education here in the state of Louisiana, and for your role in our great national debate on this important issue. Thank you.